So someone plugged my YouTube channel in like an HN comment, which was very kind of them considering how terrible my YouTube channel is. And I said that I was going to have a cool video coming up soon. This is not that video. It's just going to be time consuming to create. Work has been busy lately, and I haven't had the time to spend on it. But I'll give you a little sneak preview. It's going to be about these. But this is about something sort of related. So we have an auction house here in town. I'm sure you have one too. And I'm fond of this particular auction house because they kind of have the standing contract for excess and surplus auctions from basically everyone, from the universities, from the national laboratories, from the state of New Mexico. So there's a lot of different equipment that, goes through that auction house. A lot of IT equipment from the state agencies and the labs. And maybe because of the labs, too, there's some funkier stuff, right? So here's a recent auction purchase. I don't know if this works yet. It's a radiation meter is what it is. I'm not calling it a Geiger counter because it doesn't. It needs a probe. And I don't know if this works yet because I think I might need to do a little bit of light reverse engineering to figure out how to get a probe connected to this. It has like an Eberline proprietary smart probe connector. Those Eberline went bankrupt. That's why this got sold at an auction. So obviously they're not selling the probes anymore. They don't. Okay, we'll talk about that in a minute. Anyway, I don't know if this works yet, but I'm hoping to have a pretty nice radiation survey instrument if I can figure out how to get a conventional probe connected to this, which I think I'm just going to have to figure out the pinout and a working connector. But this is probably some kind of mil-spec connector that I can get off like Mouser if I spend enough time figuring it out. Anyway, that's a tangent. Point is, I like to buy stuff from this auction house. I see an auction where they have like 30, maybe, I think as many as 40 new in box APC SMC 1000 2U UPSs. In my network rack that is in the closet over there, I'm pointing at stuff even though like you can't even see me. In my network rack, I have a 1U CyberPower UPS right now. This would have a much larger battery capacity, and I have had a couple of experiences that mean I just kind of trust APC as a brand more than CyberPower, even though they have not meaningfully iterated on their products in a decade, which will come up here, and even though I buy CyberPower usually because they are way cheaper. But saw this auction, picked up 2 of these SMC 1002Us new in box for something like $80 a piece. So pretty substantial discount off the $500, $600 that these sell for. Now, they were new in box, but if I drag this out, here's one of the boxes. And if you've bought stuff at auctions, like this might look kind of familiar to you. This has been wet. I'm not super surprised. This came from a national laboratory. I know because the address is 1515 Eubank Southeast. And 1515. No, that's actually, well, it says NNSA right on it. So maybe this came from, but it says care of Sandia. I don't, the point is this came from the Air Force Base somewhere. And I know how the lab runs their property yard, and a lot of surplus property gets stored outdoors in tents, admittedly out of the rain, but outdoors, which is very common in New Mexico property yards. I have seen some sad stuff left to rot in the desert. But also the auction yard stored these outside, and then it rained. So I'm not sure. This is all kind of a ramble to get to the point. Yes, these were new in box in that they have not been used before. I would not call them new. APC still sells this model, but they've sold this model for a long time, and I think these might be as much as a decade old. So when I got this, I turned it on, and the battery self-check immediately failed. I was a little surprised since this is new in box, But I kind of knew, like, I got this at like a 70%, 80% discount, right? So you kind of know you're taking on some risk when you do that. And I have seen before with UPSs where they have just been in storage for so long, I think possibly as much as a decade for this device, that the batteries have died in some way. I don't know enough about the chemistry of SLA batteries to totally speculate how, but that's what I'm going to tell you about. So these APC battery packs that are used in, I think, most of their rack mount UPSs, they are two kind of standard standby lead acid battery form factor. There's probably a name for this form factor of battery, but I'm not sure what it is. But you see these all the time. Burglar alarms, lots of UPSs. I think there's some motorcycles and scooters that use this size of battery if they're smaller engine displacements. The way, when you pull this out, it looks like a proprietary like battery cartridge, but it's just two of these batteries with this plastic thing sandwiched in between, taped together. Originally with nice like APC branded tape. I don't have that, so I'm using the decorative white duct tape. And in this plastic carrier, there are just some little jumpers to put the batteries in series and then connect them to pins right there. And when I first bought this, it failed the battery self-check, and I was like, well, that sucks. Probably just needs new batteries, you know, whatever, not a big surprise. And they're not very expensive either. It's like nice name brand replacements for these, $70 maybe. But I got them out of the UPS and poked around in there, and I got 12 volts. And I thought, well, that looks pretty good. I mean, what's it unhappy about? Well, the thing is, the CyberPower UPS that I have takes two 6-volt batteries. And so I didn't even look at first. When I took it apart, I discovered these are 12-volt batteries. It's supposed to be 24 volts. So the fact that this was reading 12, not a good sign. So open circuit voltage, one of these batteries was at about 2 volts, one was at about 7 volts. Once again, I don't know a lot about the chemistry of SLA batteries, but it is a kind of a common rule for most rechargeable batteries, and SLAs are no exception, that if they are discharged way beyond their normal working voltage range, that's not a good sign. My super rough, did more chemistry in high school than college and then forgot all of it, explanation is that these depend on having ions in solution in the fluid that's in the battery. And these are gel mat batteries, so it's not like water sloshing around in there, but it's kind of the same idea. It's just more like the fluid is absorbed in a sponge in these. And when they severely discharge, all of that stuff, I don't know if it precipitates out or if it like builds up on the plates, but it comes out of the solution, and then you like basically can't charge these batteries. I was curious to see, and this is the point of this whole video, if I could, I don't know, save $60, but maybe moreover, waiting on the shipping, and get these batteries to a recovered state. Because I've heard lots of stuff before, you know, about recovering SLA batteries. There are companies that buy old car batteries and like recondition them. And so my gut feeling is that these were likely not recoverable, but I wanted to find out. So what did I do? I put each of these batteries on my bench power supply. This power supply, it's the same one that the guy on YouTube who like overvolts the children's toys has. So I feel like I've got a little YouTube celebrity here, but it's actually just like the cheapest thing if you search Amazon for DC power supply. So I'm not too proud of it. Set it to like an appropriate conservative float voltage for these standby batteries, which is like 13 volts. Well, let me, I'm skipping part of the story. Very first thing I tried, didn't think it would work. I was just curious. I have this automotive battery charger, hooked it up to one of them, didn't even recognize that it was connected to the battery. These things usually try to make sure that it is a 12-volt battery by checking the voltage before they'll do anything, and I think the voltage on these batteries was just too low for that to pass. So I set my bench power supply for 13 volts, hooked it up to the battery, 0 milliamps, right? Like all zeros as far as the display reads on that, which is to the milliamp. After maybe 12 hours, 4 milliamps. Over the course of about 6 days, the more severely discharged of these got to where it was taking about a 1/4 amp of charge current. And that's when I started thinking I might actually be getting somewhere here because, like it's taking closer to a normal charge current. The voltage was coming up. So after a long enough time sitting on the bench power supply, I got to where the open cell voltage on this was 13.6, and it would take like a 1/4 amp of charge current. So what I did, I wish I had like a test load, but I don't. So I have this dumb, it's just like 2 cheap off-roading lights that are hooked up to a low voltage cutoff relay and then clamps. And I just use these as a work light sometimes because I usually have like an old car battery sitting around that I can run them off of. So in this case, I used them as a test load. They draw about 1 amp at 12 volts. A little bit more, actually, but I have a PWM dimmer on them, so just to make my life easy, I twiddled it until it was about 1 amp at 12 volts. These are 9 amp hour batteries, so I ran them off of one of these batteries just until that low voltage cutoff shut them off at 10 volts. And I got about 7 hours on one and about 4 hours on the other. Now, this is not at all a scientific method of load testing, and in fact, I didn't have a good way to time it. So I just had a timer going on my phone, and I was trying to remember to like look over here every once in a while and see if the lights were still on. So those are very approximate, but 1 amp at 12 volts, it probably decreased as the voltage dropped. But I'm going to roughly say we had like 7 amp hours in one, 4 amp hours in the other of capacity. And then after that, they both charged at a good 3 amps. 3.6 amps is the maximum charge current that's labeled on these, so they probably should have been able to take more than that. But, it felt like they were behaving like reasonably healthy batteries. I went through a couple cycles of discharging them and then charging them. And I would charge them at first with this automotive charger because this is smart. So it'll charge them at probably 14 point something volts until they stop taking very much current. Then it switches to a lower float voltage. That's sort of the way that you quickly charge SLA batteries because you can charge them. I think on the side of these, they say up to 14.7 volts or 14.5, something like that. But you cannot float them at that voltage. So you have to have some way of detecting when they're almost done charging and then switching over to a lower float voltage, which this does. And my bench power supply, not actually being a battery charger, doesn't. The annoying thing is that only floats them at 12.7 volts, which is pretty normal for car batteries, but is low for a UPS that usually tries to get more charge depth out of these. So I'm thinking, I'm pretty proud of myself, right? It may have taken, I think, over a week in total, but I took these totally dead SLA batteries, got them, back to a fairly normal functioning state, and saved myself $60 at the cost of only, I hate to think how much time I put into this. Well, let's check this out. So I put them in the UPS today to test them, and this is where I'm wondering, is this bad batteries, or is there a problem with this UPS? Because I don't think it got wet. It was in a plastic bag in the box. I don't see any rust or corrosion anywhere, but, I can't totally exclude the possibility that it's gotten wet and maybe there's some sort of internal failure. It's acting weird. So, let's put these batteries in. The first time I put these in, I forgot to leave pull tabs, and then I had a very hard time getting them back out. So if you're doing this like I am, remember that you need to have a way to pull them back out of the hole. I have these lights hooked up to the bench power supply, plugged via this kilowatt into the UPS as just a very lazy way to have a test load going. I got to try to make sure I don't short the bench power supply there, but whatever, it's got overcurrent protection. So let's turn on the power supply to the UPS, because I just have it switched off at that power strip. These APC UPSs, it's pretty loud, but I'm kind of used to that. The APCs usually are. Honestly, I kind of like it. I think they're using better rated relays in these than the Cyber Powers, because you really hear the relays in these things. So I turn it on. At this point, the battery self-test seems to pass, because it's not starting to beep and flash the failed battery indicator after a few seconds like it did originally when they were way under voltage. I don't think that this will tell us the battery voltage. It does think the batteries are pretty discharged right now. So the first thing, it is clear that there is a capacity problem with these batteries, because under the 20 watt, let's just turn this on so you can see what I'm talking about. Those act a little weird just because that low voltage cutoff takes a moment to enable its output. So this is about a 20 watt load, 19.5. It's going to wander a little bit, I think, because the PWM controller in those is not 100% stable. So we have a 20 watt test load running off the UPS right now. When I was messing with this earlier, with that 20 watt load, it says an estimated runtime of like 100 and some minutes. But then over the course of maybe 2 minutes on battery, it started showing 0, bars of battery. So I don't know what voltage range this looks for the batteries to be in. I would think these batteries say not to float them above 13.7 on the side. So I'm assuming that that's what this goes up to, but I'm not sure. In any case, the capacity of these batteries is clearly a lot more shallow than it should be, because they discharge way too quickly. But there's something else going on here that I wanted to talk about. This is a UPS, right? So even though the battery's low, I should be able to turn off its input power and have, the output uninterrupted, right? That's right in the name. But that's not working out, huh? Whole thing shuts off. So I'm thinking most likely the output voltage of these batteries is falling much too quickly under load. It does this even if it says they're fully charged, by the way. And so I think that I haven't tried testing them beyond about 1 amp, so I don't know how much the voltage drop ends up being. It's like 2 volts at 1 amp, which I'm not sure what it should be. That feels kind of high to me. So I think puts load on the batteries, voltage on them drops super fast, gets too low, and the thing dies. There's one thing that has me a little worried, that just replacing the batteries, and yeah, I know this whole thing with trying to run it on these dead batteries, I'm being dumb. I'm being dumb even trying to do this. I have ordered new batteries. I'm just waiting for them to come in the mail. They're not very expensive either. I went cheap, and I only paid like $50 for 2 new batteries, and I'll remanufacture the cartridge myself with some more tape. Here's what makes me worry, though, that there might actually be something wrong with this UPS. So the power to it is off right now. I'm going to turn it on. It does this super consistently. I think it's possible this is normal. I have not bothered to read the manual. But when it's on battery, the first time I turn it on, no output. But if I turn it off, it also doesn't beep, which is weird. Usually it beeps when you turn it on. If I turn it on a second time, big long beep, you can hear the inverter come in. There's like a transformer or something in there that's real buzzy. And now we're running on battery. I'm going to silence the alarm. Or do you have to hold that? Oh, there we go. And the output is on. I have to hit a button on that to enable the output. But there we go. We're running on battery. Now I restore power. This sure ought to be uninterruptible, right? It also dies when it's running on battery and power is restored. And it came back, but the output was off for like a full couple of seconds. So I'm trying to think if that is just a result of the batteries or if there's something wrong internally with this UPS. It's a line interactive model, so I don't know. I'm not sure. It's not easily coming to me what internal failure mode would result in this. but I'm also not sure how the undervoltage batteries would cause that. So I'm curious if anyone knows like a lot about these APCs. There's things like the AVR relay that are like failure points, common failure points on these, but it has alarms for those, and it's not storing any alarms. So if there's something wrong with it, it's something that it's not detecting. So it's probably not the AVR relay. It's probably not just it being undervolt or overvolt somewhere. I don't know. That's my question. If you know more about these than I do, then fill me in on what you think the problem might be. Otherwise, sometime in, I don't know, a couple days, I'm going to get the new batteries. I'm going to pop those in and see how it behaves. I also have a whole second one under the desk. I picked up two, because what a deal. And I'm going to unbox this later. I'm kind of guessing same situation, but, we'll find out. Obviously, and I should mention this too, because it might come up. When I opened this and the batteries were super low, my very first thought was, does this have an internal fault that caused it to discharge the batteries when it was off? But, and anyone who buys these all the time would know this, and obviously I know it because I hooked them up and then I just forgot. In the box, the batteries were disconnected. So they weren't connected to anything, and they ended up at like 2 volts and 7 volts or something open circuit. So the self discharge on SLA batteries is very low. It's one of the reasons that they're like popular for storage applications. But I think it must have just been a lot of years, and maybe the thermal cycling of being out of climate control. We get some pretty, it can go from 20 degrees to 105 degrees here over the course of a year, right? So I'm also wondering if thermal cycling could have potentially damaged the batteries. We'll find out. When I get the new batteries, I'll find out if this works or not. If it does, I'm going to replace the Cyber Power, because this is going to run things for a lot longer than the Cyber Power does. And I want to say power outages have become more common here. I don't think it's any kind of trend. We just had a couple of pretty severe storms this summer, and we had like a 45-minute power outage at one point, which I know to people in like the Northeast, that's nothing. One nice thing about the Southwest is that we have very reliable power here. So I'd really just like to have like 30 minutes of life on the networking equipment would probably get us through, basically every power outage we see, except for maybe one a year. End of ramble. I have a more interesting YouTube video. I'm actually kind of scripting this one, so it should be a little more polished and a little less watching my hands wave around while I ramble at you about something. And it should be fun, because those Toughbook tablets did not have their storage wiped, so I've got the original software on them. I want to take a look at all that, because there's some really, honestly, some of my favorite hardware that I have picked up at a surplus auction in quite a while, and they work great and they're in great shape. Pretty awesome, especially for like $15, I think is what I paid for it. That's it. Don't forget to do whatever it is you do.